Hello everybody, welcome back to Vinyl Junkie Record Shop. My name is Mike, and today I want to talk about an amazing concert experience that I enjoyed last week. It's been about 9 days now. It was on May 21st at the Brown County Music Center in Nashville, Indiana. I want to show you what I got from it. You can kind of maybe see from the t-shirt I'm wearing. It was the Hell, Fire, and Chaos, the Best of British Rock and Metal Tour, which features Uriah Heep and Saxon. And there is the concert flyer that I'm not allowed to say who gifted me this after the concert, but someone was gracious enough to give me this after they probably saw that I had an amazing time acting like an old headbanging fool at the front of the stage. But what an absolutely amazing show this was, and what a great bill. I mean, Uriah Heep and Saxon are two legendary figures of British rock and metal, just like the flyer says there. And when this tour was announced, late last year, maybe in the fall it was announced. Anyway, when this was announced, I was absolutely stoked to have the opportunity to go see these two bands together. And then when they announced that they were going to be playing at this particular venue, which if you're in the central Indiana area, if you ever have an opportunity to go to this Brown County Music Center, amazing venue. I believe it's a Live Nation supported venue. So there are a lot of national acts that go through here. Unfortunately, that area and population is probably not the most conducive to a British rock and metal show. So the crowd wasn't amazing, but the crowd that was there was fired up, and it was a great show. And so I've got this, as you can see, the shirt that I've got here. It's got the Saxon that stand up, and you can see it's got that logo on the shirt. It was billed as a co-headlining tour. Uriah Heep played last at this particular show. I don't know if they flip-flopped the sets, like every other night, but it's been my understanding that the Uriah Heep was kind of, they were co-headliners, but Uriah Heep was top bill most nights. I don't know. Either way, it was a different type of energy from both bands. Saxon being forebearers of the new wave of British heavy metal, we owe an awful lot to them and everything that metal fans enjoy today. They were just amazing, and at the ages that those guys are, the energy and enthusiasm and the sound and the precision that they brought to the stage was phenomenal. I mean, it was a head-banging experience. I sweat. I was up there throwing the goat and banging my head. And then Uriah Heep, a different kind of energy. Uriah Heep, we owe a lot to Uriah Heep for their sound in the early days, kind of being that proto-metal sound that, along with Deep Purple and Black Sabbath, who they were always foreshadowed by, which is, I'll never really understand. But Uriah Heep, you could argue, dabbled in heavy metal, but their music is more of a progressive hard rock. And each band has established a catalog well into the 20-plus albums. And it was just an absolute joy to finally see Mick Box, because it was my first time to ever see Uriah Heep. That was the third time I've seen Saxon. Saw Saxon for the first time when they toured with UFO, and then when they opened for Judas Priest. So this was the best time that I've seen them. I mean, I thought this was the most entertaining. It might have been because I was up in the front row. But they were just absolutely amazing. I opted for this shirt for this. I never had a Saxon shirt, so I got this shirt. They had two varieties of the shirt, one with the Uriah Heep logo on top and Saxon on the top. And I picked up a Saxon Hellfire and Damnation tour shirt. I didn't bring it in to show you, but I picked it up as well. In hindsight, I wish I would have gotten a Uriah Heep Colors and Chaos tour shirt as well, but stretching the finances there. What I wanted to do with this video, though, is kind of wanted to talk about how amazing the concert was, and I think the tour's wrapped up now. So if you missed him, I mean, what an unlucky bloke. But if you saw this tour anywhere else as it went across the country, I'm sure everyone is in agreement that it was absolutely stellar and amazing. So I want to showcase some of the records that I've acquired. I was on a Uriah Heep listening dive a while back, and I intended to do a ranking video, but there are just a few of their titles that I've never acquired on any format. I've got all the classic albums on vinyl, and well, except the first two, I have like the American pressings. I don't have the British pressings of the first two Uriah Heep albums. And I just never put together that discography or did that, but that's something I'd like to do. And same with Saxon. I've been kind of on a Saxon kick now, and I've done a deep dive into their discography. And they're a band that I followed and collected in the early 80s when they were emerging. And then I kind of lost track of them in the 90s and early 2000s. So there's a stretch of albums in there that I just never bought. And I'm kind of in the process of catching up and adding to my Saxon collection. And a Saxon discography ranking is probably, or should probably follow, as long as I'm still on this Saxon kick. So what I want to do in this video is I want to show both bands' current or most recent albums, and then I want to show you my favorite album from each band. So let's start with Saxon. They just released this album in 2024. It is titled Hellfire and Damnation. I had when I first listened to it, when it first was released and streamed, I listened to it, and I don't know if sometimes the first time you listen to a record, that doesn't leave the most lasting opinion on you or effect on you. And the first time I heard it, I thought, okay, it's good. It didn't really knock me over or anything. But then, maybe about a month after it was released, I started listening to it again, and it really grew on me. And I wasn't gonna buy the album, just because these new albums just they're expensive, and I don't like paying $30 for these records. But as soon as the show was over, I promptly went to my phone and went to Amazon and ordered it. And I really do like this record. So I haven't opened it yet, because I just received it not too long ago. So let's go ahead and we'll open this one up so I can kind of show you the sleeve. And I think it's just a regular black vinyl. I don't think it's got a color variant. But this is a nice photo of the band back there. And there's the credit side and a side with the lyrics. And yeah, it's classic black vinyl. It's got a pretty neat label with some of the artwork. I really like the artwork of this album. It's really a great cover. So to the credit wise, the standard bearer, one of the standard bearer of medals of British heavy metal is Biff Byford, longtime only founding vocalist, and he in this lineup, unfortunately he's the only original member that's left on this lineup. Longtime original guitarist Paul Quinn is credited with playing additional guitars on a couple of tracks, but the guitar work was primarily handled by longtime Saxon guitarist Doug Scarrett, who replaced Paul Quinn back in the late 80s. Not Paul Quinn, Graham Oliver. He replaced Graham Oliver either late 80s, early 90s, and then late 90s, I believe. And then longtime drummer Nigel Glockler is on this album again, who has been pretty much the drummer for the last many years. Every a release here and there he was not on, and they had a session drummer. But safe to say that Nigel Glockler is a long-time permanent member of the band. And then Nibs Carter, longtime bassist who replaced, I think one album, there were Biff played bass on Rock the Nations, and then on Destiny they had a different session bassist, and then Nibs Carter joined sometime shortly after that, and Nibs has been in the band all through the 2000s and present. Great bass player. This one was produced by Andy Sneap and co-produced by Andy Sneap and Bill Byford. Anything Andy Sneap gets his hands on is quality, and it's going to sound metallic and heavy, and that's kind of what this album does. And the final note is, if you're going to replace one of your legendary guitar players, who better than to recruit than a guy like Brian Tatler, who is another godfather of the new wave of British heavy metal movement. And if you're not familiar with Brian Tatler is the founding guitarist for Diamond Head. And if you're not familiar with who Diamond Head is, but you're a Metallica fan and you always loved the Am I Evil by Metallica, that was Brian Tatler. Brian Tatler wrote that. Brian Tatler originated that. That was a Diamond Head song, and that was maybe one of the very first thrash metal songs in that particular style that Metallica would go on and really sharpen. So yeah, that's the lineup for this album. The song selection was well represented on this tour. I think they played 4 of the album's 10 proper tracks. Oh, also interesting, there's a spoken word part on the intro track, The Prophecy, that was by Brian Blessed. And Brian Blessed is a kind of a legendary British actor, and of course, for me, I'll always remember him as I can't think of his proper name, but the King of the Hawkmen in the 80s Flash Gordon film. So just, for note. But the tracks that were represented in the live lineup were Hellfire and Damnation, Madame Guillotine, There's Something in Roswell, which that's probably my favorite track off the album, and 1066. They worked in 1066 as kind of a medley with Long Arm of the Law. But this is just a great album altogether. Hellfire and Damnation is a burning opener. It's just a really solid statement of modern heavy metal. Madame Guillotine, a little slower, a little more melodic. Same thing with There's Something in Roswell. Just a great riff, lead riff in that song, which reminded me of the riff from an old Warrant track back in the 80s off the Cherry Pie album. The song was Uncle Tom's Cabin. And it's not a rip-off of that riff, but it's kind of similar in its structure, and that was my favorite song from Warrant back in the day. And was a really heavy song for a band like Warrant. But Saxon just works that formula to perfection on this song. Pirates of the Airwaves, that's a great tune that kind of gives a shout out to everybody back in the early days that had their before the days of YouTube and podcasts. They were able to get metal music out on the radio, pirate radio, which I was never part of. But that was part of the lore of the growing heavy metal movement back in the day. People tape traded, people had pirate radios, they made their own fanzines. You youngsters who are just now getting into metal, it's really sad that you missed that experience of what it was like before the internet and before before social media. I miss those days. This album to me takes the modern metal sound that Saxon has had over the last several records that they've put out, and it kind of injects a little bit more of that classic early 80s sound that you got from legendary albums like Wheels of Steel and Gentleman Leather, and then one of my favorites. I said I was going to show my favorite album. Your favorite album from a band is not necessarily their best album, but what I think was Saxon's best album was A Long Arm of the Law, which was released the same year, shortly after Wheels of Steel had come out. That was my first experience ever listening to Saxon. A guy at a local record shop recommended that to me, I bought that on cassette and absolutely loved it. Dallas 1 p.m., one of my favorite metal songs of all time. And when they got into those tunes at the concert, I was acting like I was like a proper 53-year-old fool, banging my head away at that show. But I'm glad I was able to. I mean, look at these guys. These are well-seasoned fellas, and just still cranking out awesome metal music. So yeah. If you've liked Carpe Diem, if you liked Thunderbolt, the last line of these Saxon albums that have come out in the 2000s and 2000, from 2000 on, they just really, they kind of reinvented themselves and adopted that modern metal style that was established kind of like, with Painkiller, Judas Priest, and that Riot kind of laid out with Thundersteel, that type of metal. So bands like Primal Fear, Judas Priest, Saxon, that type of classic metal, I guess you'd call it, with elements of European power metal. But they've just been churning these out left and right, and this is really good, so I recommend it. Now on to my favorite Saxon album. Historically, again, a lot of people, I'm really surprised, they crap all over this album, and a lot of people, Saxon purists and metal purists, they don't like it, and I'll never understand why, because I do recognize that the band was taking a slightly more commercial approach, which most of the bands were doing back in this time frame. But this album was an album that I remember listening to so many times. I had the cassette version of it, wore it out. I can't even find it. I'm sure I've got it somewhere still, but it was one of my very favorite albums back in the day, and it has always been, and it will forever be one of my favorite albums of all time, and that's 1985's Crusader. One of the greatest album covers ever. I think Paul, what's the name on here? Paul Raymond Gregory would produce artwork for future Saxon albums, but this one is just, I love this album. Is it their best? Probably not their best, but it's my favorite. And to this day, when I listen to this, it's pure enjoyment. It never disappoints. This is the American version. It was let me get it out here. It was on Carrere, I think. It was a French label. There's the inner sleeve lyrics sheet. It's just your standard black. Classic black vinyl from back in the day. But Saxon is the only band that I even remember from this label. But this was the American version, and the track listing is different than what was released in England. And I have a CD of this, and the CD has the English track listing, and part of your enjoyment of an album is how you remember it, and when you start mixing up the track listing, it really does change the listening experience a little bit. So I absolutely prefer the American sequence, because that's what I remember listening to. So and to me, it makes a difference, the sequence of the song. So this album starts off with the track "Sailing to America," which is one of my absolutely favorite Saxon tracks. Yeah, I know it's kind of commercial sounding. It's very happy. It's not bleak, and it's not, that kind of metal. But what a great song, and it's anthemic, and there's great guitar work, great twin guitar work from Paul Quinn and Graham Oliver. One of the most underrated and underappreciated guitar tandems in all of metal. Biff Byford's vocals are just amazing, and Graham Oliver and Nigel Glockler. This might have been his second appearance. I think this was the second album that Nigel played on. But what a phenomenal drummer. And Steve Dawson, not too much, he got himself into some pretty bad legal trouble this year. And Steve Dawson might be a really bad boy. But his playing on this album and his contributions to the band in general are absolutely phenomenal. This one was produced by Kevin Beamish, who was known at the time for more AOR kind of more, polished hard rock acts. than the tougher metal bands. But everyone who cries that this album is too commercial, I mean, Saxon, even though they were forebearers of that new wave of British heavy metal movement, they really weren't a tremendously heavy sounding band. I always considered them to be more like a boot. They had a lot of that hard rock boogie, like a more metallic Foghat, and with a lot of AC/DC influence. Kind of if you put AC/DC and Motorhead in a blender, and that was pretty much Saxon. So yeah, they were heavy, but they weren't, to say that, to cry foul about the direction of the songwriting on Crusader, I just think is really unfair. But, to each their own. There are people out there who love Crusader. I'm sure I'm not the only one who this is, Saxon's favorite album. And there are some who put this down at the bottom of their discography, and that's fine. To each their own. But to me, this is just like a greatest hits album. Sailing to America, followed up by Just Let Me Rock, which has that great slow bluesy guitar riff with those guitar squeals in there that's the kind of stuff that Dimebag would start to do with Pantera. I mean, that's the first time I remember a guitar player making that kind of noise and sound, on a song, doing it that way with that little squeal in the verse riffs. Bad Boys Like to Rock and Roll, great anthemic song. Do It All For You, that was the ballad. A lot of people, are, it's a power ballad. Well, it's a great song. I've always enjoyed that song, so I have no problem with that. I have no problem with the cover of Set Me Free, which is a cover version of the Sweets classic anthem, and Saxon does it in a way that it makes it sound like their own. If you didn't know that was a cover of the Sweet, you would think it was just a song that Saxon did. Side 2 starts off with the Crusader prelude and then into the absolutely brilliant and epic Crusader, which remains a live staple of the band's set. A little bit of What You Fancy, nice pounding rocker. Rock City, yeah, it's primitive, it's simple, but it's anthemic, and it really drives it home at the end of that song, and I love it. I just love the simplicity of it. And then Run For Your Lives, the album closes out. Just an absolute burner of an album. I love it. It will always be my favorite Saxon album. Real close. It's real close with Long Arm of the Law. But I'm loyal to this record. I've always held this in so high regard. And like I said, this is easily one of my favorite albums of all time. All right, so that's the Saxon portion. I've gone about a lot longer than I had hoped with this video, so hope you guys are still along with me. So now on to Uriah Heep. Again, totally different type of vibe, but a band that predated Saxon and emerged along in the early metal movement with Black Sabbath and Deep Purple. Uriah Heep was always in the shadow of Deep Purple. Both great bands. But I think Uriah Heep has a much different type of sound, and it's very difficult to describe. But if you listen to both bands, you know what I'm talking about. But Uriah Heep, just a legendary band, and Mick Box on lead guitar, I think, is one of the most underrated and underappreciated rock icons that there are. And again, it was such a joy to see him on the stage in his 70s. Still kicking ass and rolling out these songs. And the thing about Uriah Heep is, most of the classic, I think pretty much all the classic lineup have left the earth now. But the band has continued on, and they've reestablished themselves throughout their career, and they made themselves relevant when they were facing irrelevancy. And they've been churning out quality album after quality album over the last 20 years, 30 years. And that's just like Saxon. The albums that you might not put them on the shelf with some of the other albums that were coming out at the time, but you knew if you pull a Uriah Heep, any album that Uriah Heep has released in the last 20 years, it's going to sound very, very good. It's going to sound different than what they did in the 70s. and it's going to sound different than my favorite album that I'm going to show you. But that's the point of growing musically, and they've just been very steady, and the output has just been absolutely high quality, and it's no exception on their latest release, Chaos in Color. Came out in 2022. This was one of my favorite albums of that year. It was a album of the year on a lot of channels. So it received great press, and it's an amazing album. Track listing on the tour was well represented again. They opened their show with Save Me Tonight, great song. Hail the Sunrise, great song. Hurricane, a great rocker. And I think that was it from this album. Absolute great album, though. One Nation, One Sun, that's a really good record. Freedom to Be Free, that's kind of an epic song on here. The CD has a couple of bonus tracks. I don't purchase the CD, but I do listen to it online. And a couple of the bonus tracks are really, really great. One of them, I can't recall the name of it right now, but it kind of channels that classic Uriah Heep sound from the 70s. But this album is really the overall quality of the release, or the packaging. That's the word I want. The packaging is really great. And this lineup has been pretty steady over the last several years. You've got Mick Box on lead guitar, Bernie Shaw on vocals. Phil Lanzon is a longtime keyboardist, great player, but for whatever reason he wasn't on this tour. I'm not sure why. And if you're going to find someone like Saxon found Brian Tatler to fill in on guitar, who did Uriah Heep recruit to play keyboards? None other than Alan Wakeman. Alan Wakeman, who is Rick Wakeman's son. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And then the current rhythm section, Dave Rimmer on bass and Russell Gilbrook on drums. These two guys here, they are absolutely solid. I mean, one of the best rhythm sections that's out right now in rock and metal. And they were just so precise and so sonically dominant on the stage. They sounded absolutely amazing. So just your standard black vinyl with that Chaos in Color logo on the label. Yeah, I do wish I had purchased a tour shirt that had this kind of color burst on it. I just think that's really neat. But I didn't, so I know. Maybe they will come around again. I do not know. Everyone in these bands are in their elder years, and just it's an unfortunate reality. You just don't know how much time is left with anyone. And I'm glad I finally got to see Uriah Heep. It's a must see. If Saxon or Uriah Heep ever come by my area again, it's a road trip. It's a definite. I would definitely go. So that's the newest one. And then my favorite album from Uriah Heep, again, a bit of contention. And I meant to kind of tie this in with my discussion on Saxon. A lot of times, your favorite album is going to be kind of depending upon when your experience with the band began. So we're talking about bands who have spanned 5 decades, 40 plus years for Saxon, 50 plus years for Uriah Heep. So if you were a teenager in the 70s and your first listening experience to Uriah Heep was Look at Yourself or Demons and Wizards, then you might always prefer that era of the band and that sound and style of the band, and you might not be on board with the modern sound, and that's fine because things do change. Conversely, if you met Uriah Heep, if you're a teenager now, or you're just now getting into rock and metal, and someone said, "Hey, check out Uriah Heep," and they gave you one of their last 3 or 4 releases, and you really liked that, and then someone said, "Oh, by the way, check out this," and then you put on Salisbury or Demons and Wizards, and thought, I'm not too sure of that. That's very fair because they're so drastically different. So the timeline in which you are introduced to a band really influences what albums you like and which ones you don't like. That's why I was first introduced to Saxon, with those two records that I mentioned, and Crusader was just one that I played and played and played and played and fell in love with. I had heard of Uriah Heep when I was getting into metal, but I wasn't super familiar with their back catalog. But the record that I remember getting that really piqued my interest in the band was an album that was released at a time in their career where they were facing irrelevancy and wanted to try to reinvent themselves. There had been some big changes in the lineup, but Mick Box still remained. And they were channeling, on this particular album, they were channeling the energy of that new wave of British heavy metal that Saxon was putting out, and that bands like Saxon, Def Leppard, Motorhead, those are the classic bands. But that sound was becoming so popular in America with the hard rock bands and the emerging metal bands. And Uriah Heep kind of thought, I think we can ride this wave a little bit too. And they released this absolute monster of an album, Abominog. And it was in 1982, I believe. 82, okay? So this would have been about the same year that Strong Arm of the Law and Wheels of Steel were both released in 80, I believe. In 1980. So this would have been like 2 years after those albums came out. And Uriah Heep was channeling that energy and adding that element into their songwriting. And this is just an absolute brilliant and underrated album of the 80s hard rock. You've got Too Scared to Run, which that was a minor hit. On the Rebound, Chasing Shadows, Prisoner, and then maybe my favorite Uriah Heep track of all time, and one of the most underrated metal tracks ever, is a song called Sell Your Soul. And if you've never heard that, go on YouTube, check out Sell Your Soul, Uriah Heep, and you will stack that. I think after you've heard it, you'll stack that anthem up against anything that any metal band in the 80s, Dio, Scorpions, Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, you'll put that song up on the same top level shelf as those. Side 2, The Way That It Is, Think It Over, Hot Night in a Cold Town, Hot Persuasion, Running All Night with the Lion, that's a great tune. There were some other songwriters that came on board for this album. I'm not going to do a whole deep dive into that, but check it out. When you go on Wikipedia, and you can see who some of the additional songwriters were. But your lineup was Mick Box on guitars. A guy named Peter Golby was the singer at this time, and I've heard him compared to, like, if you mixed Ronnie James Dio and Lou Gramm together, you would get Peter Golby, and that's not too bad of a comparison. The guy had a great range and great sound. Bob Daisley and Lee Kerslake was the rhythm section. You might recall them from being the bassist and bass and drums on the first couple of Ozzy Osbourne albums. So Lee Kerslake, longtime drummer for Uriah Heep, and then John Sinclair was on keyboards and vocals. So a great lineup. This was released on Polygram through, I think, Bronze was another label in England. I'm not sure. But there's no, unfortunately, back in the 80s, you were hit or miss if you got good packaging. There was no, this is the kind of the generic Mercury logo, and then this old crappy sleeve. No lyrics, no liner notes, no nothing like that, which is always disappointing. This was reissued and re-released on CD. I'm not sure if it was a Rock Candy. I don't think it was one of those Rock Candy reissues. It was reissued on CD. I picked it up hoping that it would be a sonic improvement. I didn't notice that so much, but the packaging is really awesome, and there's some liner notes and lyrics and things like that you never got with the original. So if you're inclined, check that out. I think if you're an Uriah Heep fan that gave up on him after the original lineup kind of went to kaput and you never got on board with Abominog, give it a try. You might like it. Again, it's drastically different than what the band was doing a decade before. But I think this album works. This is one of my all-time favorite albums. One of my all-time favorite album covers. Absolutely love this album cover. I do not recall the name of the artist. It's probably on here. Les Edwards. Yeah, Les Edwards. And if you check him out, he does have, he's got some other art that's available on his website. But, elements of like the classic Frank Frazetta and all those kind of things. I mean, this album scared me. I was 12 years old when this came out. I remember seeing this in the record store, and it caught my eye, and it scared me. And the music is not as heavy as the album cover would suggest, but it is a heavier, more polished new wave of British heavy metal style that the band incorporated on this album. And again, that was in 1982, and it's drastically different than the style that they're playing now in 2024, which is more of, I would think, kind of a bombastic, progressive hard rock. There are elements of metal in there, but it's I would not classify modern Uriah Heep as heavy metal. This one straddles that line of, you could call this a metal album, call it a hard rock album. There's AOR elements on here too, but all around, great record. Absolutely love it. Everything from the album cover to the songs, to the performances. Some of these folks aren't with us any longer either. Unfortunately, we've lost Lee Kerslake, I believe Peter Golby and Bob Daisley as well. Such a shame. But Mick Box, this guy right here, absolute legend. And I was overjoyed to see him walk upon the stage and play that guitar. It was legendary. So to wrap this up, I'll show you this one more time. Absolutely fantastic tour, great bill. Uriah Heep and Saxon, absolutely phenomenal night. Every song was a classic. Every song that both bands played was legendary, and it was a good time had by all who were in attendance. So that video is a little long-winded. I tend to be. Hopefully, I've kept your interest through this. If you saw this tour, drop me a line in the comments. Let me know what you thought about it. Let me know what you think about the bands, what your favorite albums are from the bands, especially my Saxon fans out there. Let me know what you think of Crusader and how you feel about that being a Saxon fan's favorite record. But yeah, thanks for stopping by. If you're new to the channel, I'd appreciate it. A like and subscribe helps me out. I've just recently surpassed 300 subscribers, and it doesn't sound like much, but you got to keep chugging along, and maybe one day I'll get to 500, and who knows, maybe before I croak out, maybe I'll have 1,000 subscribers or so to my channel. But I appreciate you stopping by. Please let me know what you think of these things, and I'll catch you on the next one.